just the other point to
Yep.
make here, Mark, let's remember that the 2014 season poisoned the well for so many college football fans with the college football playoff and how we rank and how we evaluate teams. And what was the really big scandal of the 2014 playoff and those rankings? It was that TCU was number 3 in the penultimate, the next to last ranking show. It beats Iowa State by 52 points. Did exactly what it was supposed to do. But then Ohio State vaults them. And I mean, I know Ohio State looked great against Wisconsin, but TCU did not stumble in that last game. And yet TCU was number 3. So it created the idea that the label on the soup can, if you would reverse those positions, if Ohio State was number 3 and TCU was number 5, I would bet every last dollar I own, which isn't a whole lot, that Ohio State would have remained ahead of TCU. But because it was TCU and because it was Ohio State, the brand name program got elevated. It's much as Alabama made the 2017 playoff because it was the biggest brand name. It was the biggest TV draw. And it just it reinforces that idea for college football fans that your brand name is what matters in the rankings. And that if you have the leverage and you're a brand name, you get the benefit of the doubt in the rankings. That is never how it's supposed to go. It's what have you done? What's the work you do? What's the product you create each and every week? What is your collection of results each week as we reevaluate freshly each week your body of work? That's how it's supposed to work. But the college football playoff, the BCS, and AP polls and coaches polls throughout the past several decades, they have all reinforced the idea that if you're an elite school with the elite brand name, that premium brand name on the soup can, then you get the benefit of the doubt in every situation. And fans are programmed to think like that. And what Mark Rogers is doing with his top 25 that makes sense, we strip away the label on the soup can. It's just soup. What's the best soup? Forget about Campbell's. Forget about Progresso. Whatever brand you might like. That's irrelevant. It's what's the best soup. What soup has the heartiest ingredients? You strip away the label. You're just looking at the metal can. Well, what's the best quality? That's kind of the philosophy of this. Ignore the labels. Just look at the product.
And again, the title is that it makes sense, not that it's perfect, not that it's flawless. Certainly call in and we'll discuss. I'm not saying that, and I've had a number of people comment in the comments and then they come up with their own top 25 that makes sense. And I've looked at it and said, yeah, I totally get just because I've got somebody at 10 doesn't mean they can't be 12 or 14 or, it's just a measured, logical look at the results driving the rankings, not perception or we think Ohio State's 13 this week, for example. I do not think Ohio State's the 13th best team in the country. I think they're much better than that, but they have yet to prove it.
Absolutely. Like, who is the best team in the country, or who's the 5th best team in the country? Like, we can make our projections there. Like, Mark, you mentioned Syracuse. Syracuse has a great resume. No one thinks that Syracuse is one of the top 10 teams in the country.
No.
But does it have the 3rd best or however best body of work through 3 games? Like, you can make a case, given that it has quality, multiple Power 5 wins already on its resume, whereas loads of other schools don't. And of course, with Notre Dame looking absolutely terrible, dealing with Ohio State's ranking for a moment, like Ohio State's win over Notre Dame, that doesn't count for much, or at least it shouldn't, right? Notre Dame lost to Marshall, was lucky to beat Cal, phantom offsides call against Cal in the first half, and then a Hail Mary at the very end, which went off the fingers of multiple Cal receivers.
Yeah.
So beating Notre Dame right now, like, none of us expected this, but it's what we have. A win over Notre Dame right now, 4th week of September, 2022, doesn't mean much. Again, it's surprising. It's not what any of us thought, but that's like the empirical, observable reality we have in front of us. So if you're saying, oh, they beat Notre Dame when Notre Dame was ranked number 5, no, it's not what you're ranked when you beat someone, it's the quality of team over the course of the season. And we're constantly reevaluating the quality of wins over a season. So the value of a Notre Dame win in week 1 was really high because we all thought Notre Dame would be great. But the quality of a Notre Dame win now has to be much lower. So accordingly, you have to rank Ohio State much lower. And we briefly touched on this earlier in terms of our discussion of the Pac-12. So we got to follow Michigan State and BYU. Like, we now need to see how good Michigan State and BYU are in terms of how we measure Oregon and Washington and the quality of their rankings. In terms of where we rank Oregon and Washington over the rest of the season, how well BYU and Michigan State fare, that is a central question in terms of how we constantly reevaluate a top 25 ranking, which makes sense here at the Voice of College Football.
Yeah, all sorts of people are piling on Notre Dame right now, and for good reason. They've looked awful the last couple of weeks. But if we're sitting here in 3 months and they've beaten Clemson and USC, well, then they righted the ship, and it's different.
Then that becomes a higher quality win. Absolutely. That's how it goes.
Florida's
That's how it's supposed to go.
Look at what Florida's done since the Utah game.
They've
struggled.
Exactly.